I was sweeping the porch when his truck turned onto our street. The same model he used to chase summer with. Only this one had steadier tires and a paint job that pretended it had never seen dust. The broom paused in my hands. I didn't gasp and I didn't smile. I just watched the sun slide along his windshield like a coin across a counter. Watched the way he parked with his wheel kissed up against my curb, as if the town itself had been saving that square of concrete for him. Folks say I keep a calm face. That's not always true. I keep a useful face. It's the one I learned after he left. He sat in the cab a moment, like a man finishing a song to himself, then climbed out with that old posture I remembered, shoulders loose, chin confident, the world an audience that didn't know it had bought tickets. Time had squared his jaw and folded little paper creases at the corners of his eyes. A streak of gray at his temples made him look like a photograph left in a book too long. He saw me, and the smile rose up. Easy esteem, Lila, he said. My name fit in his mouth the way it always had, like water he hadn't earned. It's late for visitors, I said. There was still light, yes, but it was the kind that meant you'd better salt the meat and close the gate. I figured I'd catch you here. He looked past me at the porch, the small table with the chip saucer, the chair that used to wobble until I set a folded napkin under its short leg. Place looks the same. It isn't, I said. We let the chime speak for us a moment. The breeze had picked up down the block where the river turns, and it carried that damp mineral smell I always liked. The one that says tomorrow will be cooler and the tomatoes will be grateful. He hooked his thumbs in his pockets like a boy practicing brave. You look the same too, he said. I'm not. He laughed, soft, as if I was teasing him from inside a memory where we were still young. I came back, he said. And there it was, a seed in his voice, the assumption that back was a direction. That ended on this porch. Most folks who leave come back eventually, I said. It's where the roads go when they get tired. It took me a while, he admitted. Things got complicated, music, work, some dumb choices. Some good ones too. I've been out there long enough to know what matters. And what matters? I asked. His eyes warmed. You? I set the broom against a rail so it wouldn't fall. Behind him the water tower cut the sky into a darker blue, and the first streetlight woke up without making a fuss about it. I could hear Mr. Dwyer's radio from his garage. To houses over a baseball game, talking in that lazy way men use when their hands are busy with a rag and a socket wrench. It was the sound of a town that had seen more returns and departures. You hungry? I asked. He blinked, surprised by the question he hadn't earned. Sure. I've got stew, I said. Or I can fry an egg. You never were patient with a slow pot. He grinned like a door opening. Stew sounds grown up. I could try being that. I pushed the screen with my hip and let him follow, not into my kitchen. Not yet. I kept him in the space between the little square of room where we keep our shoes and the coats. That know the shape of our shoulders. He stood there looking at the hooks like they might hand him his old life. I took down my apron and tied it easy. If I was going to listen, I preferred to do it with a spoon in my hand. He watched me move, and I could feel the weight of his eyes like coal it hasn't learned it isn't diamond. Place smells like lemon oil, he said. Same as always, same polish. Different hands. I lit the burner. He started with Nashville. Folks like to start there if they've ever hunted a song. He described rooms with low ceilings and sticky floors, the clatter of ice and cheap cups. A stage that gave back echo instead of applause. He told me about a manager with a smile like a scratch record. About the way applause sounds like forgiveness until you try sleeping on it. He laughed at his younger self because he wanted me to. Then he told me about a woman he didn't quite call a wife and a year he didn't quite call a marriage. He told me he'd almost been a father once, and that almost had kept him awake. For 2 Februaries in a row, he'd driven to Asheville, to Knoxville, to any place whose name stretched out the road ahead of him like a possibility. Finally, he said, he looked up and the world was finished with doing tricks for him. Everyone's finished with tricks sooner or later, I said. I ladled stew into a bowl and set it on the table we used to lean across. My hands knew the distance without looking. He sat in the chair, creaked the same song it sings for every person who puts weight on it. He took one spoonful and hummed approval like a compliment he meant. You still cook like this? He asked. Yes, I slid a heel of bread toward him. For myself. For whoever's hungry when they knock. You always were good, he said, and I let him. Men will sometimes catalog your goodness like they're making a list of reasons. You should be grateful for being seen, eat, I said. He did. But he also looked at me over the steam measuring. The way carpenters do with their eyes before they lay the tape. I don't expect it to be easy, he said. But I always knew where I'd end up. Right here, is that so? I figured a woman like you, someone who believes in things that don't rust, would be here, waiting. I poured water from the pitcher. The glass sweat in my hand like a nervous palm. I believed, I said. Then I learned believe doesn't pay the light bill or hold your mother's hand when she forgets which daughter you are. It doesn't patch a roof or quiet a house at 3 in the morning. Belief is good company, but it won't take out the trash. He smiled, and it was kind. And it was foolish. You talk like someone who's been alone too long. I talk like someone who got good at it. He set down the spoon. I'm here now. The clock above the stove ticked, holy as a choir. Now is a generous word, I said. He leaned back and laced his fingers behind his head like a boy who's earned the answer he wants. I've been thinking, he said. I can pick up work at the lodge. They remember me. Folks out at the ridge do too. I could help around here. Fix that gutter. Paint the fence. We could turn the back room into something. Studio, maybe. I still got songs. Better ones, you always did, I said, because it was true. He could take 3 chords and build a porch you wanted to sit on. But a back room is for sleeping or for company, not for dreams that chew up wiring. He laughed again, softer, tired of the edges. You're mad. I'm not, I said. I have my mad ears. They were loud and they were useless. What do you want me to say? He asked. His voice wasn't sharp. He wasn't the breaking kind. I'm sorry. I am. I shouldn't have left like that. I shouldn't have let pride be my pastor. But I thought, he spread his hands. I thought I had to outrun who I was. You weren't running from you, I said. You were running from the time it takes to keep a promise. He looked at the window, at the square of early evening leaning on the sill. Maybe, he said. But I'm here. Doesn't that count? It counts the way weather counts, I said. It changes what you wear. He stood like he might walk into the living room and lay himself across my couch, the way he used to on Sundays after church, shoes off. One arm flung across his eyes to block the light. I didn't move. The doorway is a boundary you don't cross without a welcome. He felt it and stayed where he was, hands on the back of the chair, knuckles going pale then pink as the blood changed its mind. What did you do with the ears? He asked. Without me, everything, I said. He smiled without humor. That sounds lonely. It sounds true. I sat across from him, folded my hands so I wouldn't clean something that wasn't dirty. I worked. I took my mother to her appointments. I made a pie every 3rd Sunday because Mrs. Carter's boy brings her grandkids then, and she forgets to feed herself. I walked down by the river when the water was low and picked out the glass. That could cut a child's foot. I went to bed when I was tired and woke up when I was rested. I had a laugh that wasn't from being surprised and a cry that wasn't from being left. There was a man once who wanted to kiss me goodnight for more than a month. He moved away for better work and married a woman who keeps bees. I hope their honey is dark and stays that way. You dated, he said. And his mouth did a small hurt foolish thing I almost forgave. I lived, I said. He took that the way men do when the road they meant to drive turns out to be a field. His eyes went to the mantel, where I keep the photographs that aren't for display, so much as for reminding. My mother in her good dress, leaning out of a truck window holding a basket of apples like she'd grown them herself. My sister on the steps after chemo with her head wrapped in a scarf that made her look like she belonged in Paris. The diner crew lined up by the walk-in after. We won a ribbon at the county fair for a chili recipe that had no business being as good as it was. He found his own face there, in a small frame I kept on purpose aching under the water tower the summer before he left. His hair too long, his smile too sure. He looked at it the way men look at the boy they were, before they learned which mistakes have a price. You kept that. He said. I kept the truth. I answered. You were real. So was the leaving. I could make it right, he said. And I heard the story he was writing even as he spoke it. A morning of coffee and a list on a legal pad. The number for a part-time job. A ladder against my gutter. A song he plays quietly while I wash the dishes and not along. Time itself turning its face and saying it had always meant to be kind. Make what right? I asked. Us, he said. This, what we were. What we could be still. The air thinned in that particular way it does when a storm is deciding whether or not to bother. We were a beginning, I said. We could be a goodbye that behaves, he repeated, tasting the word, not liking it. You're acting like I'm a stranger. You are, I said gently. You're a man I once knew. And a man I don't know at all, standing in the same shoes. He ran a hand through his hair, and laughed like a man who finds his pockets empty at the register. I didn't come here for a sermon. Neither did I said. But sometimes the truth sounds like one. He picked up the bowl, and finished the stew like it could give him leverage. When he set the spoon down his hands were steadier. If I called tomorrow? He said. Would you answer? If I'm not busy, I said. With what? With the rest of my life? I let him stand in that doorway again, where the house was both invitation and boundary. He carried his bowl to the sink without asking, and that small courtesy put a quiet in my chest. He rinsed it, set it upside down on the towel. He looked at me like a man waiting for a cue. I gave him one that didn't belong to him. Your father still keeps his tackle box under the truck seat? I asked. He blinked at the seam in the conversation. What? His tackle box, I said. We used to go down to the bend and catch nothing for hours. Your father would swear in a way that made your mother pretend she couldn't hear. I smiled without showing teeth. Tell him I hope his line held through the winter. You want me to tell him you said hello? He said slowly. I want you to be somebody who can carry a message without opening it, I said. He nodded. A man learning small language again. He wiped his hands on his jeans. And for one heartbeat he was the boy leaning against my car after the football game. The one who asked if I wanted to see the stars from the ridge and meant it pure. Then the heartbeat was over and he was just all his years, all his choices, all his rows. I'll come by tomorrow, he said. Same time. We can talk more. You can come by, I said. Talking is a thing we can do without breaking anything. And after that? After that, I said, we'll see if the porch holds. He gave me that smile again. The one that has paid rent in more cities than I ever visited. It will? He said. He believed it, which was almost sweet. He opened the screen, stepped back into the almost dark. The chime said good night in the voice they use for every person, sinner or saint. He hesitated like a man who wants to ask if he can leave his coat here. The way we do when we plan to come back. But he wasn't carrying a coat. Just his old certainty. He took that with him. When his taillights slid past Mrs. Carter's hydrangeas and turned left toward the water tower, I blew out the candle on the table and listened to my kitchen cool. The fridge hummed like always. The clock made its faithful tick. I was aware of my own breathing the way you are after you've run just enough to remember what your lungs are for. I washed the pot, wiped the counter, put the chair back under the table so it wouldn't snag my hip in the morning. I wanted to cry and didn't. Not out of pride. Out of the knowledge that tears are a currency I spend carefully now. I made myself tea I wouldn't drink and carried it back to the porch anyway. Because the ritual mattered more than the taste, the night had put on its soft coat. Somewhere across town a dog was telling a story to no one in particular, and crickets took turns being brave. I sat and let the day settle into me like a book marking its own page. I said a small prayer, the kind that doesn't ask for anything but steadiness. It was answered by the simple fact of me sitting, steady. Tomorrow he would come again. He would bring a plan that sounded like kindness and wore the shoes of invasion. He would use the word we with a craftsman's confidence. I would answer him with the kind of patience that has nails in it. I don't know if there is a right way to end a beginning. People like to say closure like it's a door friendly enough to knock on. Around here we don't close much. We pull things to as far as they go and put a chair against them. That's good enough for wind and sometimes for men. I finished not drinking my tea and set the cup down. A moth found the porch light and performed its old lesson. Tap, tap, decide to live. I watched and I learned again when I went to bed. I slept on the left side because I liked the right for turning over and looking at the window. Morning would come either way. It always does. It does not ask permission from anyone returning. He came back the next day just like he said he would. Not at the same time, but close enough that he could pretend it was coincidence. Men like him believe that arriving 5 minutes later proves they have no expectations. The truth is, they arrive when they've practiced a speech in the truck mirror enough times to think it sounds. Humble. I was on the back porch shelling peas into an old enamel bowl. The bowl had a chip the shape of West Virginia on the rim. Funny the things that stay. He opened the gate without asking. The hinge squeaked. I'd been meaning to oil it, but I didn't apologize for it. Some things are allowed to protest. You working? He asked. Always, I said. He sat on the step. Not too close, not too far. A respectful distance, which unsettled me more than the old familiarity would have. Familiarity, I knew how to answer. Respect. That one can trick you into giving back more than you should. He picked up a pea pod from the pile and tried to split it along its spine the way I was doing. Clean. Gentle. Confident the seam would open because your hands know how green things give way. His didn't open right. He tore it. The pea scattered across the boards like marbles. He laughed. Guess I'm out of practice. You guessed correct. He picked them up one by one and held them in his palm like an apology too small to say out loud. Your mama used to make us do this every summer, he said. Said it kept our fingers honest. She wasn't wrong. I dropped another clean line of peas into the bowl. The sound of them landing was a soft rainfall. My mama asks about you sometimes, he said. She always did have a soft spot for what she thought was gentle. He looked at me. Not wounded, just seen. I wasn't gentle. No, I said. You were beautiful. And beauty can be unkind without meaning to. He nodded like he understood now. And maybe he did. Time can teach if you let it chew on you long enough. We shelled peas together in silence for a while. Our hands worked differently. Mine steady. His learning again. Every now and then his knee brushed mine, not by accident. But not bold either. Just enough to say I remember. I didn't move away. Remembering is not the same as returning. When the bowl was nearly full, He wiped his hands on his jeans again, a habit older than either of us wanted to admit. I talked to my father last night, he said. How'd that sit? Like gravel in my teeth, he smiled, tired around the edges. He said if I was coming back to this town, I'd better make it worth somebody's time. And if I wasn't, then I'd better leave people alone so they can keep living. He always was direct. It's the only language we both speak. He rubbed the back of his neck, a gesture that had always meant he was about to say something uncertain. I want to make amends. Lila, that's a strong word, it's the right one, amends. Not apologies. Not explanations. A word that carries work inside it like a kernel carries a sprout. You remember the porch light at my mama's house? He asked suddenly. It wasn't what I expected him to say. But I nodded. It was always on, he continued. She kept telling me she'd turn it off when she knew I was somewhere I belonged. When I left, he let the sentence fall away and didn't chase it. I drove past that house late last night. Light was off. I took a slow breath. The evening wind moved through the drying sheets on the line, making them breathe in and out like gentle ghosts. That doesn't mean you belong here, I said. I know, he said. And he meant I hoped. We both stood then, as if the conversation had moved our bones without asking. I took the bowl of peas inside to rinse. He followed only as far as the threshold and waited. He didn't cross. That mattered. My father wants to talk to you, he said when I came back. He says it's overdue. I agree, I said. We walked to Garrett's porch the next evening. The sun was low, the kind that lays gold along the tops of fences and turns every spider web into a cathedral window. His father sat in his old rocker, the wood worn smooth by time and anger and forgiveness he never offered. He looked older, smaller, like time had taken handfuls from him instead of years. So? Garrett said. You came? I did. He nodded once. Sit, I sat. My old love stood behind me like a boy waiting for his father to hand him a great card. Garrett didn't clear his throat or soften his eyes. He wasn't built for gentle. But his voice wasn't cruel. You were good to him, he said. Better than he understood. He left anyway. That was his sin. He'll spend the rest of his life paying it down. He already is. My old love didn't move, didn't speak. Garrett looked at me the way storms look at a field. Not to destroy it, just to know what's still standing. You don't owe him anything, he said. But if you choose to give him something, time, a meal, a seat on your porch, make sure you're giving it because you want to, not because you're remembering how you felt before you learned better. I nodded. That's all. He said, go on now. We walked back in silence. When we reached my porch, he stopped at the bottom step. What are we now? He asked. I looked at him. Long enough for truth to rise without force. We are two people learning how to talk to each other again, I said. Nothing more. Nothing promised, he repeated softly. And I watched his shoulders lower. Not in defeat but in understanding. He didn't ask to come inside. He didn't try to kiss me. He didn't make a plea. He just said, I'll see you tomorrow, if the day wants us to. I answered. He smiled, small, real, and walked away with his hands in his pockets, like a man warming them on something precious he's finally willing to carry carefully. That night, I slept without dreaming. Not because I was at peace, but because I was awake now. News moves curious in a small town. It doesn't sprint. It settles like flour dust after you've clapped the apron. By midweek the diner knew he was back. Mrs. Carter said it without saying it when she slid into my booth and pushed a napkin toward me, like it carried state secrets. They've got peaches stalls over at the Wednesday market, she murmured, then added. Saw a familiar truck on River Road. I thanked her for the geography and the concern. She patted my fingers like a metronome set to compassion and went to pay with exact change. As is her way of keeping the world honest. I kept pouring coffee. I kept asking men who still called me kiddo if they wanted another plate. I wiped the same laminated menu I've been wiping for 15 years. And thought about how a town will let you age if you don't make them look at it to hard. I am not the girl who waited on him after football games, hair trying to flirt with my shoulders. I am a woman with good shoes and a back that tells me when the weather is changing. Both have their beauty. Only one has aspirin in her purse. He didn't come to the diner. That felt like kindness. He did show up under my eaves late that afternoon with a ladder and a coil of new gutter. He tapped the ladder feet like a man courting permission. May I? He asked. You may fix a thing that leaks, I said. But not the ones that do on purpose. He grinned small. Understood. He worked quiet. No brag, no singing. The occasional clank of metal. The sigh of old leaves released from a corner they had claimed as home. I sat on the step with a glass of lemonade and didn't offer it until he had both hands free. He took it grateful. A bead of sweat traveled down his temple and got lost in the gray of his hairline. I watched it the way you watch a river find a new path. Not romantic, just respectful. Neighbors passed slower than usual, like their dogs had suddenly grown philosophical. A few waved. A few said his name like testing a bridge after flood season. He waved back like a man willing to pay toll. No one stopped to meddle. The town, to its credit, can be nosy and merciful in the same breath. When he climbed down, he stood with his palms on his hips, surveying the straightness he had persuaded from stubbornton. First honest line I've made in a while, he said. Lines are easier when they're not people. I answered. He nodded. Truer than I like. He didn't ask to come inside. He coiled the old gutter like a snake that had finished its sermon and carried it to the curb. Lodge called, he said, almost as an aside. They've got a Friday slot by the fire if I want it. Not the main room. The small one. Folks who didn't get reservations but still want to feel like the weekend's worth something. You'll take it, I said. I will. You'll be tempted to play the songs you wrote when you were sure, I added. Maybe try one you wrote since. He laughed, surprised at how naked hope can feel when someone names it. All right. One since. He wiped his hands on his jeans. You'll come. If the day wants me to. It did. Friday slid and tidy in gold. The lodge smelled like money that had learned manners, cedar and citrus and ice cubes. That didn't dare clink too loud. I sat near the back with a view of the door. I like exits. I like knowing they exist even when I don't use them. A couple from Charlotte argue quietly about how long a person should stand in front of the fireplace to justify their Instagram. Two teachers from our district shared a dessert like it was a secret. I saw his father at the bar, drinking water with the seriousness of a man who'd had enough of other choices. He took the small corner like a man who has learned that corners are not punishments. They are edges to lean into. No grand entrance. No how y'all doing in a voice borrowed from the radio. Just a nod to the room and a hand on the guitar that looked like a handshake. He'd finally learned how to keep. He played to from the old jar melodies that still knew the town by name. People perked up. Memory will do that to a body. Then he did what I'd asked without asking. One new song, smaller, straight. Not trying to set the night on fire, just trying to keep it from getting cold. It wasn't about me. That's the mercy and the proof. It was about a man learning where his voice sits without leaning on a woman to harmonize. When he finished, he didn't look from my face like a young man hungry for the grade. He stared at his hands, then up at the room. Then he breathed. The applause made the kind of sound that means you may come back. Not roaring. Enough? On my way out, women I've known since before we could afford leaned toward me with a choir of suggestions. He's different. He looks tired in a good way. You can see he knows. World breaks him. Lila. If you're lucky, it breaks him clean. I thanked them for the hymns and put my sweater on. Outside, the air had put on its cool. He caught up half a minute later, carrying that softness men get when they've made something honest in public. Walk you? He asked for a bit, I said. River Road kept us company. The water sounded like it was chewing on light. We didn't talk. That was the point. Halfway home he cleared his throat. I didn't dedicate a song, he said. I noticed. I used to think every tune had to be an offering. Maybe it's enough that it's not an apology. Maybe, I said. We stepped over the place where the sidewalk lives. Because a sycamore refuses to pretend its roots are shy, he put out his hand without thinking, and I took it without promising anything to either of us. We didn't hold on. We just didn't fall out by Saturday. The town had stitched its opinion. At the market, a woman I barely knew pressed a bag of overripe peaches into my hands and said, "Make something sweet out of them before they turn," advice disguised as fruit. At church Sunday, Pastor and tilted her head in my direction when she preached about Peter and doors, and the difference between keys and invitations. The Lord does love a metaphor, so do I. But I pick mine. He kept showing up with work instead of speeches. Tightened a shutter that flapped in the west wind. Oiled the hinge that had been telling my business to whoever would listen. Mowed without scalping. Left clippings bagged. Never brought them to my cans without asking, as if even my trash deserved consent. He ate when I offered. Told me where he was going without asking me to keep track. He calls his father more than he wanted to, and less than the old man deserved. He did not once say we like it could erase the arithmetic. One afternoon, the lodge asked if he'd open for a man with a name bigger than the room. He said yes, and then stood under my eaves like he hadn't. Working up to telling me before I heard it elsewhere. It's Thursday, he said. 7 o'clock. I'll be nervous. Nervous is honest. He looked at the back room window. I knew he was imagining it the way men imagine kitchens, as something that might feed them. If only someone else would keep it warm. I'm not asking to stay, he said, which is often the disguised form of asking to stay. I know. I said, say it only when you mean to carry the answer. He smiled in a way that said he'd write that down if he had paper. The day of the opening set. The sky came over with a sulk. He pushed against the leaves. We both knew thunder was choosing a county to punish. He stopped by in a clean shirt that had not earned its stripes yet. Will you come? He asked. I think I'll listen from the porch, I said. You'll hear me whether I'm there or not. He nodded, and for once didn't try to turn my no into a maybe with a grin. All right. The storm arrived like a room full of ants, loud, efficient, interested in everything they shouldn't be. I sat, counting. 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi between flash and boom. Like a woman agreeing to the weather on its terms. I pictured him in the small room, strings swelling against the damp. The crowd tucking napkins over knees, feeling special and endangered in equal measure. I said a small mercy for his hands. The phone rang around 9. Not his number. His father's. He did fine, Garrett said. Didn't embarrass himself. Didn't embarrass this town. That's high praise. It is, he said. Then, after a beep meant for humility, he asked me not to call. Said not to meddle. I chose to meddle. You always do. I'm old, he said. They let us. He hung up before he could say something gentle and ruin the persona he wore like an heirloom. Jacket. The rain eased. The street smelled like pennies and pine. I took a towel outside and wiped the porch rail just because I like when my arms remember work. After a storm. His truck turned the corner quiet, as if even the engine understood reverence. He climbed out, looked at the sky, let a grin walk across his face, and then off the stage. Storm broke, he said. They tend to, I answered. He didn't ask well. And I didn't offer proud of you like a ribbon. I poured him a glass of water and one for me, and we drank to the fact that we were both upright in a world that does not guarantee such favors. He set his glass down. He looked at the doorway the way men look at doors they dream about. Can I sit? He asked. In there? Just for a minute, no, I said softly. Not yet. He closed his eyes like the answer was a bomb and a bruise at once. Thank you, he said. For what? For saying it soft. He left with his shoulders square to the weather. I watched the taillights go. Small cherries dissolving into the black. I stood a long while, listening to gutters. He fixed keep their promise. You can love a man and not hand him your furniture. You can forgive a boy and still sell the couch you once kissed on. You can be kind without offering shelter from a rain he invited. Sunday came slow. At church. Pastor and caught my eye. After the benediction and gave me the nod of a woman who knows fences are holy, too. Out on the steps, women clucked softly around me like warm hands. He looks better. He acts better. You deserve better. All 3 were true. And none of them answered the only question I cared about. Am I better? Now. I walked home by the long route that passes the ball fields. Chalk lines held their edges brave after the storm. Boys ran where boys have always run. Toward and away in equal measure. A father yelled from the bleachers with love disguised as instruction. I sat for a minute on the highest bench and let the wind write its name on my forearms. 14 years is a long time to carry a maybe. My arms felt lighter, not empty, just mine. When I rounded the corner to my street, I found a bouquet sitting on the bottom step. Not roses, he would have known better than that. Zinnias, marigolds. Flowers that work for their living. No note. I picked them up, smelled the sturdy soil sure scent of them, and set them in a jar inside the door. I didn't text thank you. I didn't text anything. I watered them and went about my day. That, too, is an answer. That night, I slept deep. The kind of sleep that makes the morning apologize for waking you. When I opened the back door to let in the air, the world smelled rinsed. The chimes spoke in their lowest voice, the one they use when the audience is just me and the jay on the fence. I boiled coffee. I buttered toast. I turned the radio to the station that plays hymns on Mondays because they know we need reminding. Then, there are mercies in this life I will never be done counting. One of them is the fact that some doors only open inward, and I am the only one with the hand to do it. If you want me to, I'll continue part 4, the town picnic, an old song that tries to pull her back. A boundary crossed and corrected, and the quiet, grown finish where she chooses her life without punishing his. Asterisk. The town picnic came that Thursday, the kind they still call a community potluck. Even though half the dishes were bought at the grocery store last minute and disguised in personal bowls. Long tables stretched under the oaks by Foster Park. Sunlight flickering through the leaves like it couldn't decide whether to stay or wander. Children shrieked in bursts. The kind of laughter that doesn't consider consequence. The kind adults envy. I wasn't planning to go, but Pastor Ann had asked me to bring cornbread. And she has a way of making requests sound like the weather inevitable and gentle. I carried the warm dish across the lawn and set it among casseroles that could have fed the county twice over. People nodded. People asked how I'd been. People asked without asking how things were with him. I answered each question slowly, like shells picked from a beach. I'm well. House is holding steady. Storm didn't take the roof this time. Truths, all of them. None of them an invitation. He showed up maybe 20 minutes after I did. Not late, not early. Right on the kind of time people use when they're trying not to show they tried. He wore the same work boots he'd had since before he left, laces new this time. His father walked 2 paces behind him not because the old man followed, but because he was learning how to let someone else go first. People made space the way polite people do. A shift of weight, a glance, a nod that says, "We remember, we will let you be." I poured lemonade, he fixed a folding chair that wobbled, we kept a distance that wasn't cold. Just true, then, there was music. There was always music in small towns. Someone has a cousin who plays guitar, a nephew who learned 3 chords, a retired teacher who can harmonize anything. They gathered under the gazebo like it was instinct. Someone called his name, not loud, not insistent, just enough. He looked at me not for permission, but for calm. I didn't smile. I didn't frown. I simply breathed in and nodded once. He walked to the gazebo, shoulders even, steps sure. Took the guitar. They passed him. No grand speech, no explanations. Just a breath and the mic that said, "I am here, now, exactly as I am." He played something new again. Smaller than the lodge song, quieter, not about longing, not about regret, about working things that are hard to fix. Halfway through the song, the wind picked up the hem of my dress. I watched children chase bubbles that burst faster than they could catch them. I listened to the sound of his voice not to hear myself inside it, but to hear him. He finished, the applause was soft like cotton folded warm. He handed back the guitar. I stayed seated. He didn't come to me right away. He helped a boy tie his shoe. He carried water jugs to the shade. He talked to 3 old men who never forget a single sin but forgive anyway because it passes the time. Then he walked toward me. Not close, just enough that our shadows touched. "You heard it," he said. I did. "Was it all right?" "It was honest," I said. "That's all anything needs to be." He nodded, slow. The kind of nod a man gives when something inside him that used to be restless finally sits down. Then he made the first mistake he had made since coming back. He reached for my hand, not grasping, not pulling, just reaching, and I stepped back, not harsh, just firm, like closing a book softly. "No," I said. His hand froze midair, and he let it fall to his side. Not ashamed, not wounded, just the understanding. "It's not that I don't care for you," I said, keeping my eyes on the children still tossing themselves into joy, as if the ground could never hurt them. "It's that I have learned to care for myself too. And that took time. Time you weren't here for." He breathed in, the kind of breath that gathers truth before it speaks. "I didn't come back to collect anything I left behind," he said quietly. "I know that now." "Good," I said. He paused, searching for words that didn't break anything. "I want to live in a way that doesn't make you sorry you knew me." I let that settle between us like dust in afternoon light. "That," I said, "you can do, without asking anything of me." He nodded. We stood like that a while, not lovers, not enemies, not even a story trying to retell itself, just 2 people in the same summer evening, breathing the same warmed air, letting the past find its place behind us instead of in front. When the sun finally dipped behind the trees, the town began to pack up. Laughter then. Tables folded. Someone accidentally left a dish spoon behind. Life resuming. I walked home alone. The night was soft, the porch light glowed warm, the gutters held the rain from last storm steady and sure. I stepped inside. No ache, no hollow, just peace, and peace after everything is its own kind of love. The evening settled quiet that night. Not silent, just settled. Like dust after movement, I made tea the way I always do. 2 minutes steeping. Spoon laid on the saucer instead of the table. Small habits that make a life feel like yours. The front door creaked soft around 7. Not the kind of knock that asks permission, but the kind that knows the house. My daughter stepped in. Not a trace of judgment in her face, just curiosity, the gentle, careful kind. She set her bag down by the chair she always sits in, the one that dips in the cushion just enough to show she's still a part of this home. "I saw him today," she said, not accusing, just placing the puzzle piece on the table. I nodded. "I figured you'd hear." She didn't ask how I felt. She has never been that kind of child. She watches first, learns the shape of things before she touches them. She poured herself tea from my cup without asking. She's done that since she was 8. That part of us didn't break. We sat like that for a while, quiet, not strained, the way people do when they know words matter and shouldn't be wasted. Then she asked the question that had been sitting between us like the steam rising from our cups. "Do you still love him?" There wasn't fear in her voice, just wonder. The kind you have when you're old enough to know love changes shape but young enough to hope it doesn't disappear. I didn't rush. Love, when spoken to quickly, always sounds smaller than it really is. So I let the tea cool. Let the question stretch. Let her see me think. Finally, I said, "Yes, I do." Her eyes softened, not in relief, not in concern, just in recognition. "But I don't love him in the way that waits," I continued. "And I don't love him in the way that aches. I don't love him in the way I used to." I set my cup down. both hands on the porcelain, steady. I love who we were, I said. And I love that I survived who we became. And I love the woman I grew into when he was gone. She leaned back, absorbing it, that love. I said quietly, doesn't ask for anything, not return. Not apology. Not homecoming, it just exists. Like a scar. Or a season that passed. Or the sound of a river you used to live near. You remember it. But you don't need to go back to hear it, she breathed out, long. Like something unknotted in her chest. I think I understand, she whispered. I reached across the table and took her hand. We didn't hold on tight. We didn't need to. I don't want to go backward, I told her. And I don't want him to either. We are two people who were once young together. That's all. And that's enough. The porch light buzzed outside. Some moth beating itself silly against the glass. Convinced there was something behind the glow worth reaching. We sat together and listened to that sound, the soft, hopeful, foolish flutter of wanting something that isn't actually there. Then my daughter smiled. Slow and warm, you're different now, she said. I am, you're calmer. I am, you're stronger. I looked at her. I had to be, she nodded. The way people nod when life suddenly makes sense in a way it didn't 5 minutes ago. We didn't speak again for a long time. We didn't need to. The quiet wasn't empty, it was full. Full of memory, full of breath, full of something settled and true when she left. She kissed my cheek, not quick, not absent-minded, but thoughtful. I'm glad you didn't wait, she said at the door. So am I replied. I watched her walk to her car. I watched her drive away. The taillights disappeared down the hill like two small embers in a dark, wide world. The night returned. Not heavy. Just present. I washed the cups, dried them, placed them back on the shelf, and I stood there a moment in my kitchen. In my home. In my life that I built with my own hands, feeling not the echo of loneliness, but the fullness of choosing myself and not apologizing for it. That was a real story. Not that he came back, but that I didn't. The letter came 3 days later. No grand delivery. No doorstep apology. Just a plain envelope slipped through the mail slot. The corner bent a little, where it had been tucked in someone's jacket pocket too long. My name on the front, written the way he always used to write it, not hurried, not practiced. Like every letter was a promise he meant to keep that time. I stood with it in my hand for a while, still in my coat, purse slung over my shoulder. I didn't rush to open it. Old pain teaches patience. Old love teaches breathing. When I finally sat down, the house was quiet. Not the hollow kind of quiet, the lived-in kind. The kind you earn. I slid my thumb under the flap. The paper inside was only 1 page. No perfume. No tear marks. Just words, steady, simple, unadorned. I didn't expect you to wait for me. I just didn't know how much you would change. Or how much I needed to. I read slowly. I thought love was a moment. I thought it was something that stays frozen if you do. But love grows even when two people don't grow together. And I see now you grew into someone stronger than I ever was. My breath caught, not with pain, but with something like understanding. I am not asking to come back. I am not asking to fix anything. I just needed you to know. I remember who we were. And I am grateful. No begging. No bargaining. Just truth. The last line sat alone, centered like a stone in still water. Thank you for loving me when I didn't know how to love myself. I folded the letter, not with trembling hands, just carefully, deliberately. I didn't cry. I didn't smile. I simply let the words settle in the space they belonged to, the past. But not the wound. I didn't write a reply. Not out of bitterness. Not out of pride. But because sometimes the most loving answer is silence. The kind that says, I don't need to go backward to honor what was true. I don't need to reopen something just to prove it mattered. Some things end without breaking. Some endings are soft. I placed the letter in the top drawer of the kitchen, not hidden. Not displayed. Just kept. A memory, not a tether. That evening, I lit a small lamp in the living room. Soft light filled the room in warm gold, brushing the edges of the furniture like an old photograph. Outside, somewhere in this same town, he was living his life, trying to be a better man than the boy who once left, and I was living mine. Not waiting. Not holding on. Just living. Peace is not loud. Peace is not triumphant. Peace doesn't announce itself. Peace just sits down beside you one day and says, you did the hardest part. You kept going.